I came from the mud. There's dirt on my hands.
So, Tom, what's your favorite Diageo brand?
It has to be Diageo, right?
Well,
I would say,
Tom, I can't believe you said
no,
that.
I'm of course, we're saying Diageo. I'd probably say Captain Morgan's from the spice rum that you guys have done for the years. It's been one of my drinks. Okay, well, hello and welcome to the stream, an unscripted, unedited, free-flowing conversation featuring guests who reject the status quo with a bias for action in the world of water and beyond. My name is Tom Freyberg. I'm an environmental journalist and content creator specializing in water.
And I'm Will Sarney, a water strategy consultant and investor doing my part to solve wicked water problems.
And today, to kickstart Season 7, which has a special focus on water and agriculture sustainability, we are thrilled to kickstart the season with Michael Alexander, who is the Global Head of Environment at Diageo, a multinational alcoholic beverage company behind some of the world-famous brands, including Guinness, Johnnie Walker, Smirnoff, and Captain Morgan. So, Michael, thanks for joining us. Welcome to the stream to kickstart Season 7. How are you?
Thank you very much for having me, Tom and Will. It's great to be on.
Great to see you.
Thank you for being on.
Yeah, Michael, we're going to get going, but before we do, I've got a really, really serious question we want to sort of kickstart with, and that's, look, I know you're not supposed to say if you have a favorite child, but we have mentioned some of the major brands under the Diageo umbrella. I'd love to know kind of what your tipple is, if you have a favorite, whether you're a stout guy or a Scotch guy. Yeah, can you say which is your favorite child or not?
You're not the first person to ask the question, Tom, but I'm based in Scotland. I lived about an hour north of Edinburgh. I'm lucky enough to have the view out my house, which are barley fields. Spring barley is nearly get sown now, and that goes to the distilling industry. So obviously, I've got a bias towards Scotch, and the biggest Scotch brand in the world is Johnnie Walker. So I'm afraid it has to be a Johnnie Walker highball. But there's many other brands out there, of course, and indeed, there's lots to be enjoyed responsibly.
Very good.
You handled that question well.
Yeah, well, I do love Scotch. I like Guinness. I like a good Smirnoff as well, and there's plenty others there as well. But that's where the roots are. When you're in a farming community where I live and they're growing crops for your product, it's quite unique, and I'm very lucky to live here.
Amazing. Sounds like a beautiful view. So, all right, thanks, Michael. So we wanted to kind of get you on to kickstart the season as a major alcoholic beverage provider focused on agriculture. We've taken a bit of a look at your sort of water strategy and your wonderfully named Society 2030 Spirit of Progress. Love the name. The phrase regenerative agriculture comes up quite a lot. So it'd be good to kind of get a sense from you of what that really means to Diageo, and then really kind of in terms of some of your current work when it comes to addressing water in the supply chain as well.
Yeah, well, for a while now, we've had a four-pillared strategy, if you like, at Diageo, probably for over 10 years now. And we keep it simple because different pillars are owned by different parts of the business. And water, as we all know, is a wicked problem, isn't it, Will? And we know it's complex and it's difficult. So we have four pillars very neatly, kind of water in our supply chain, water in our operations, water in the communities, and water advocacy. And each one of those pillars has a strategy, a budget, an owner, a metric that we report against, a public target. So we try and keep things simple. But life's not really simple, is it? And when you come to Regen Ag, which is, I suppose originally comes from a carbon reduction perspective and a driver, obviously there are multiple benefits from that. There's benefits for water, there's benefits for biodiversity, there's socio-economic benefits, there's flooding benefits, there's obviously soil health benefits, and indeed lots of different co-benefits associated with Regen Ag. So I think it's what we've discovered and what we're learning, and I think we're not the only ones, is that taking a kind of much more holistic approach to at a landscape level is much more effective at driving the right outcomes than continuing to work in silos, if you like. So our big kind of drive now in the next, I suppose, iteration of our strategy, and we refresh it every 3 years, so we'll refresh it next year, is to see how we can structure ourselves so that we can take advantage of those co-benefits, those triple wins, if you like. So when we're doing a water project, yes, we've got a sensitive water basin where we want to do collective action and replenishment and community work and our own piece and our own bit on our own distilleries and breweries. But we also want to work with farmers. And we also want to help, plant trees, and we want to restore wetlands. And so, but how do we take advantage of the kind of biodiversity, the carbon, the socioeconomic as well? We need to get metrics of socioeconomics. What's the well-being, gender, inclusion as well? So how do we blend all those together into a single kind of scorecard, if you like, for projects which we're doing in the communities and on the landscape? And this is what we've been sort of scratching our heads about, and there's various work coming out from different organizations which are proving really helpful, but there's not a consensus exactly how it should be done. So we're building that model ourselves to try and make sure that going forward we're much more integrated. So regen ag and water and carbon are no longer separate programs, but they are integrated programs, and building in that nature benefit as well, because we know that the climate crisis is a nature crisis and vice versa. So yeah, we're a long way from solving it, but that's definitely front of mind for us at the moment, Tom.
Hey, Michael, can you talk a little bit more about engagement with the community, engagement with the smallholder farmers or farmers at scale, and what some of those initiatives look like? I'm interested really in two things. One is technology, and how do you identify technology, and how do you support deploying that to the farmer, who in many cases operates with incredibly, frighteningly thin margins, and in many cases, I believe can't pay for it on their own, and then also just some of the softer side of it, not just carbon reduction, or water reduction, but enabling the ag sector to thrive in in the face of a changing climate and poor economics.
I think where we start in some parts of, say, sub-Saharan Africa, we've been working there for decades. We're indigenous businesses that are part owned by local shareholders, and we feel part of the economy and part of the community. And for so many years, we've been working with communities farming communities to try and improve their productivity to meet our expectations. It's not a philanthropic endeavor, it's a business driver to improve quality, improve efficiency within our production processes, to get that yields that we need from farmers. And I think where we started quite a long time ago, 20 years ago now, was with access to water. So you mentioned, how do you unlock the kind of potential of communities? You can't possibly go into a smallholder farming community and start talking about yields and agronomic interventions to improve soil health when their wives and daughters are walking 10 kilometers to go and get safe drinking water, probably unsafe drinking water, and putting themselves in danger at the time, not going to school, getting waterborne health diseases. And it's really the wrong prioritization. So what we try to do is we try to identify through our program to where we can put in safe access to clean water and sanitation to begin with, as part of our kind of contribution, if you like, to community well-being, but also critically for us is productivity as well. So if farmers are ill or farmers are using their time fetching water, they're not hopefully improving the yields and quality of their crops for us and for others, because they're not just growing for us, but also they're not developing as a community and as a family unit. So I think that unlock is really important for us to begin with. The technology bit is really interesting because there are a lot of more and more platforms out there, and I could name one or two that we're using and experimenting with, that give us that data, that give us that smallholder farmer data. And for those that have worked in, say, for Africa or other global South countries a long time, sometimes, if I'm being honest, you go back to those countries and it feels, crikey, nothing's changed in 20 years apart from there's more people, and there's nothing else that's happened here. But actually, what hasn't happened is they have mobile phones now. They've all got mobile phones. So it kind of jumped, didn't it? So the one thing they do have is mobile phones, which is, the living conditions are still poor, the poverty is still, the GDP is still poor, the well-being is still poor, and the health issues are still poor. But they have access to phones, and that's the key unlock for us, is that access to phones. They get market information through their phones. They get they can upload information that we can give them on their productivity or their soil conditions or their weather, whatever it might look like. So I think that technology piece there, and it helps us aggregate it all. And we've been testing it in East Africa. We're going to roll out some of it into India now to see how we can work with farmers there as well and see if the model works. And it helps us pull together all that data. And with that data, then we can look for solutions that are fit for purpose for industry. Because not all farmers are the same.
So, Michael, as part of that, do you have partnerships with telecom companies to either develop apps or, it sounds like you're leveraging the access to mobile phones and all that brings, but are you crafting unusual partnerships with information communication technology companies to deliver data directly to the farmer?
Yeah, technology companies, yes, not specifically telecoms companies, but technology companies and platforms that say that this is, that we've got the data, we've got the platform that can access the data. And we're still experimenting with it a bit, and we haven't got it rolled out consistently across all our different markets, but it's certainly an important part of our smallholder and farmer engagement plan. Other areas we're looking at, say in the global north, particularly, we announced in last year in Scotland and Ireland, we're doing much more on the ground crop science, if you like, with rather than using generic modeling we might do in other parts of the world. We're using measurement, in-field measurement, to take, for example, carbon or moisture or biodiversity, bird calls or whatever it might be in terms of how we measure biodiversity. So where we have a big influence and we're a big off-taker, then we've been investing in pilots that really are driving kind of on-the-ground experimentation and scientific technology kind of development to see what is the best outcome and intervention we can advocate for in terms of regen ag, and that's quite intensive, and that's pockets of best practice with specific farmers.
Do you see then that sorry, well, like as a multinational, there's a sort of a responsibility there to. You mentioned a lot of development on the sort of data as a service and that data side to empower local farmers, but I guess responsibility from a multinational to not only help pilot with third-party companies, but also to help accelerate and scale those solutions, but also share with other multinationals and big beverage companies on the pilots that you're doing. Can you talk to us a bit about how that's maybe part of the planning as well, just to make sure that the pilots with these companies aren't sort of repeated, if that makes sense? Yeah,
no, absolutely. And there's various initiatives, and just to be clear, I don't run the Regen Ag program. I'm responsible for knitting the kind of Regen Ag, climate, nature, water strategy together so that it's integrated. So yes, we do. We work in a lot of different partnerships with the WBCSD. We have a network. We have an initiative that started with Nestle and is now being promoted also by Diageo and I think PepsiCo in the UK, called the Landscape Enterprise Network, where that's exactly that. We're all putting together what we feel is the best outcomes for the particular landscape to share and co-finance in a blended model to deliver interventions on the ground, working in different landscapes and with different solutions. But also at a global level through the SII platform and other initiatives, we're involved, WBCSD, very much involved in trying to understand how we can collaborate. We're quite, we're relatively small, really, to be honest with you. In certain countries, we're big, but relatively globally, we're reasonably small. We need to partner. And I think that's a big message about everything on ESG, isn't it? Beyond just water and regen ag is the innovation that's required in partnerships. And more and more you'll hear people, scope 3 is the ultimate problem, isn't it? Scope 3 carbon, ultimate problem. Right. Scope 3 water is the same. We've got to have to work with lots of other people in innovative ways to get the solutions we need. And it's not one company can't pay for it all, or can't do it, or can't achieve it.
Yeah, it strikes me, and has been the case for a while, that the real innovation, the exciting part of what we all do for a living, is around innovation and partnerships. And to your point, I think a lot of people believe, the layperson probably, that the private sector company, whoever they might be, can just fund it all, and it's the problems are daunting, and really do require partnerships that are unconventional in a lot of ways. You use the word I want to just kind of drill into, nature. And
Right.
I also believe that one of the big trends is the private sector focusing on nature and thinking about what that means for their business and how they can be a catalyst for change. Can you talk a little bit about how you're thinking about nature as not just a theme, but as an initiative that maybe glues together a number of things that you're doing?
Yeah. No, well, it's very front of mind for many companies, and some have been ahead of the game, and I wouldn't say we were ever ahead of the game. But there's different drivers to this. There's your nature dependencies and your nature impacts, and they're kind of different.
Mm-hmm.
But I think ultimately for us, and it's a good segue to the water conversation. Ultimately, is that our biggest nature risk is fresh water. Okay. So it's no coincidence that the Science-Based Targets for Nature, or whatever, SBTN's first guidance was on fresh water. The first one, the second one I think was on land, but the first one was on fresh water. So we've piloted that and tried to understand what that guidance for setting nature targets in local catchments is regarding fresh water. And that's quite challenging, to be honest with you, because it gives you some results that are pretty difficult to swallow sometimes. But they haven't completed their guidance, so they're still waiting for step 4. But ultimately, nature is hugely important, not just as obviously, I don't need to tell you the solution to climate crisis in many respects, and vice versa. But increasingly, we're going to be asked by our stakeholders, investors, and required in some cases through the TNFD, the Task Force on Nature-Related Financial Disclosure, is going to have to report our dependencies and impacts. So, like we had the TCFD for carbon or for climate, we're now going to have that the TNFD for nature, and they're very much aligned in approach and structure and framework. But so we will have an increasingly kind of mandatory requirement to report to our shareholders what our impact is on nature and what our dependencies on nature is. So we've done a very comprehensive baselining of our nature impacts and dependencies across the whole business and our supply chains. And that does mean, really going into the traceability challenges that many companies have as well, which we have as well, in terms of, well, where actually do we get this from, and where does that come from, and where does this come from? So that baselining has been hugely important, not just in terms of the nature, but also our water footprinting as well, in terms of, well, which suppliers are we using? So we're getting cork from Portugal, or we're getting licorice from Pakistan, we're getting vanilla from Madagascar. Hang on here, I thought we were just getting grain from Scotland and Ireland and Canada. It's getting a bit complicated now. So, so this kind of unraveling of the onion in terms of your supply chain and really understanding where everything's coming from and understanding the risks. So, it's all material, that double materiality that's required now.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. I love when you mentioned cork, because, of course, you need that, for your, some of your products. So really interesting and complex in so many ways.
So on the topic of complex, and I know we've talked about partnerships and creative partnerships, and this phrase that we repeatedly see come up is collective action. So I'd love to kind of get your perhaps candid view, Michael, just on even a reality check of where I think a lot of companies talk about the need for collective action, the need for collaboration over competition, but in reality, when it comes to territories, it comes to finance, politics, it can be very different. So talk to us kind of how you see collective action actually playing out, and maybe some kind of anecdotes of examples on the ground as well.
Well, Thomas, put it simply, it's difficult. It's very difficult.
We should just end it there. That's it.
Collective action is difficult. I think we found the title for the episode for sure.
Cut.
Yes.
I think, so just the context is that we have about 150 production sites globally. About a third of them are in highly water-stressed areas. They're producing about a third of our volume. And within the third of those sites, we've identified 12 priority basins for us. Okay, and that's the point for us. There are 12 priority basins for us across 4 continents, and we're committed to collective action by 2030 in those 12. We're also committed to, driving that collective action locally. So So we've been doing this for a while now, and I wouldn't say we're any experts, and the whole concept needs lots and lots of collaboration, and that's absolutely fundamental to stating the obvious. But we work at a global level, say through the Water Resilience Coalition, the CEO Water Mandate, the AWS, the Alliance for Water Stewardship, working with WWF, have been long-term leaders in this area, the Nature Conservancy, ditto. We're trying to working with all of them to understand what we need to do on the ground. And there's lots of strategic advice, but when it comes to what's on the ground, in every different circumstance is very different, with different stakeholders, different priorities, different projects already going on. And what has been really difficult is cementing or convening people, pull them together to always think on one plan in one area. We spend months and months and months thinking about different basins and different parts of basins, and you're there and we're there, but we weren't going to go there and we're not going to go there. And I think increasingly I realize we've got to make some compromises, and that I'm holding out the mirror to ourselves as much as anybody else is, we've got to make compromises here for the greater good. And what's absolutely clear to me, and I've said it for a while now, and I say it to our business, and this is a business driver, I mentioned TCFD and climate risk disclosure. We disclose our climate risk. We're asked to financially calculate what the risk associated with climate change is to our business. The biggest climate change risk we have is water, and in these 12 basins. And if we don't do collective action in these basins with others, we are not going to be managing our climate risk. We're not going to be helping those communities and that catchment adapt to climate and improve their water security. So that is the kind of fundamental business driver. Yes, we'll do our replenishment programs. Yes, we'll try and make our breweries and distilleries the most efficient in the world and make sure that water quality is good, and we'll work with farmers and our individual projects. But unless we've got a grand plan, a big master plan that everybody is bought into, that everybody wants to work to in a collective way, in a collaborative way, and inclusive as well, with government, NGOs, civil society, everybody else across one plan, then we're not going to be improving the water security of that basin, and we're not going to therefore be addressing our climate risk.
You bring up I think one of the challenges of collective action, and again, as an outsider, not as a multinational making these investments, that collective action sounds great. It's like, how could you disagree with it? But alignment is sort of the rub in all of this, that, I wouldn't say it's a risk, but it's easy to sign up for something and say, yeah, we're in. Much more challenging to align very diverse stakeholders and actually have them put money into that to activate whatever you decide to. So is the alignment or tension around alignment, one of the biggest challenges, or is it funding, or both? Or
no, I think you put your finger on it there, Will. I think it is that alignment, and that alignment looks different in different places. So I've got 12 basins I'm managing, and I want to measure the same metric in each basin so I can report it, and I can report to my financial director what the return of investment, if you like, is, inverted commas, on my investment in collective action, and what the risk are mitigated. But I don't really have honestly, I don't have much of a clue, because there's no single way in which I'm measuring it across all basins. And that's because every basin is different. And it might be that, it's convenient for me to want that alignment because across all basins, because that's how I want to measure it in different continents and different countries and different basins. But actually locally, it doesn't matter beyond what's locally contextual important to them. So getting that locally alignment first is critical. And what we find is that it varies culturally as well. So you'll go to one country where there's a long history of working with government and public sector and NGOs, and you go to another country where absolutely government just don't work with private business. They don't collaborate with private business.
Right.
And therefore, how do you stimulate it? What I would say is that companies shouldn't be leading this. Where we are leading it, we're kind of reluctant leaders because it's a gap. What we really need, and I say it again and again, but and I know it's recognized, is we need those conveners, those independent conveners, the NGOs and the civil society organizations and the organizations that can really independently drive collective action. It shouldn't be companies. Companies can stimulate it, they can help fund it, they can put the intellectual kind of contribution to it, but ultimately, I would love it if NGOs came up and said, can we run this for you? Can we do this for you? And we want to pull it together. So that's been a real challenge for us, because there's a gap there. There's a big gap.
Are you starting to see that happen in terms of, NGOs have their own challenges.
Exactly.
I would say that NGOs have business challenges just like every other entity in a lot of ways. But are you seeing some of the NGOs fulfill that role and have the funding and the person power on the ground to say, okay, we're going to mobilize these 20 stakeholder groups and we're going to run this like a project? I mean, is that?
Yeah, it happens in pockets of, I'll give you a good example in Nairobi, where we have a big brewery and we have a brand called Tusker, and we use a lot of water. And we take it from the Upper Tana catchment, and some of our growers are there as well. And TNC a long time ago created one of the first water funds in Nairobi, and they kind of, it's nice because they transitioned it to local ownership. So it's now local ownership. I think they're probably still strategic advisors. I'm not sure, but it's local ownership, local board, local employees driving this collective action, and we're involved in that, and we announced just recently some more funding for that. And that's where it is working, because it's not ours. We're giving money to the fund. It's called the Upper Tana Nairobi Water Fund, right? So we will give money to the fund, and it's up to them to spend it how they wish, but we within the scope of work that we've indicated, as it were. And so we're not the conveners, we're not the organizers, we're not the running it. I think the farmers probably prefer that. I think certainly the transparency around that is much better. The inclusivity of that's much better, and that's where we want to work. But we have to work with trusted organizations and funds, if you like, that have got a track record of delivering. And sometimes that's more difficult because there might be a gap in a basin where there's nobody there. So we'll do some analysis, and then we'll do lots of scoping work, and we work with the Nature Conservancy to do all the scoping work of collective action and what's around in a basin to understand how we can get involved from the start, from a clean sheet. And there'll be hundreds of little projects going on, which are all great, but there's no master plan, and there's nobody convening it together. There's nobody knitting it together.
I'll stop talking, but in a minute. It seems that there's an opportunity for capacity building with civil society also. So if in fact, the farmers are going to run this or be an active stakeholder along with TNC, then supporting their growth and their development and giving them the tools is an important part of it. Is
Definitely.
that fair to say? Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think we need, as you say, NGOs are businesses as well, and they've got challenges in particular markets as well, and who they work with. But what I would say is that, and we've discussed this in the past, haven't we, that engaging with government is absolutely critical to the success of any collective action. And I think that internally within Diageo, I've been banging the drum that we need to do more to engage with government on policy, to encourage them to invest in their national adaptation planning, to encourage them to have a master plan for water infrastructure to mitigate climate risks, to encourage them to pull together multiple stakeholders into a master plan to deliver better water security, and also importantly to uncover better enforcement of regulation, which we know isn't happening. So that's again building capacity, training up. It's not the nature-based solution projects or the replenishment projects. It's about the kind of a core fundamental building blocks of good collective action and good water security that need to be in there in order for us to improve to reduce our risk. So I think, and that needs to be very inclusive. It's not a corporate government relationship. It's much a multi-stakeholder relationship convened by hopefully NGOs and civil society, and then corporates contributing their perspective to it, because ours is only just one perspective, but we're trying to drive that, knocking heads together and making sure that everybody's working together.
Fascinating. We could talk about this for days, but we won't. Tom will just shut it off or shut us off.
No, it's I think it's really interesting, Michael, to hear about the kind of the 12 selected basins at risk, and then the different approach depending on the geography and the stakeholders involved as well. But there seems to be a lot of talk at the moment around sort of standards, whether it's enterprise level standards or site level standards. And you mentioned some of the organizations involved in those standards.
Yeah.
But from a kind of, I guess, outside in a viewpoint, it looks as if there's a bit of crossover and perhaps also some gaps that have been left from standards. So where do you sort of see this from your perspective? And do you think in some recent standards that have been developed that will kind of help in your efforts in what you're doing?
It's very diplomatically put, Tom, wasn't it?
Yeah, did you notice I was
I,
very thoughthtful in how I worded that?
so, I sit in the US, so I can be incredibly blunt, but Michael, I want to see how you answer that.
Okay. All right. Well, first of all, in full transparency, I'm a director of the Alliance of Water Stewardship, but I'll take that Alliance of Water Stewardship hat off and just talk about it from a Michael perspective. Yeah, I haven't read the latest iterations that have come out from SGS and BSI and others, and so I'm coming from a kind of very general perspective of how do we move forward with this. And if you reflect on the reporting kind of trends and developments, slowly, people might not like it, but slowly we're getting more and more consensus on corporate reporting on ESG, and that's principally around the ISSB, right? So that's where we're getting much more consensus. In Europe, it's the CSRD, which is looking quite intense, and we're all doing our double materiality to understand how we're going to report against those metrics. But so in a reporting perspective, there seems to be that harmonization slowly that's beginning to happen across from either side of the pond. We're starting to align behind a common set of metrics that we're going to report, that investors compare like with like, that NGOs and those scrutinizing businesses quite rightly can start to compare like with like, because we spend a lot of our time unpacking this to explain that it's not like for like at the moment. So that, from a reporting perspective, has been, I hope, is going the right direction, but the jury's still out, I suppose. From a standards perspective, I think that harmonization needs to happen as well. And it's difficult, and I appreciate we're in a market-free world, as it were, and there's a good bit of competition helps, but a bit of competition and can confuse. Right. And I think there's a risk that there's confusion, and I think there's a risk that actually we don't uphold good standards, because if there's ever a time that corporates are super conscious about what they are claiming and what they are saying, it is now. And we all know the greenwashing, the green hushing, or whatever you like that. So, but it is, again, in the US, you'll be very familiar with what's going on there in terms of the politics of it there, and in Europe as well, and elsewhere around the world. Certainly, we need to be super sensitive about what we say and how we report it and what we're claiming. And standards are good. And independent, ICO, or whatever it might be, recognized standards are really important. But if they're too high a bar or they're too complex, then there's a barrier to entry and there's a barrier to scaling up, isn't there? And that's what I worry about. I worry about the scaling up and the impact. So we need to keep it a balanced approach. I think we do need harmonization. I'm not sure if I particularly welcome competition, to be personally completely frank, because I'm going to get a question saying, well, why aren't we doing that one? They're doing that one, and we're doing that one. You always said this one was the best one to do, and now they're doing that one. I'm going, oh, no, please. So I do think it adds a little bit of confusion, but if it can work well together and it can be better harmonized and importantly, scientifically based and credible, that's a really important piece for me. Then I'm open. I'll try to be open-minded about it. But it's difficult when you're kind of tsunami, and if it's nature, it's water, it's carbon, it's regen ag, it's reporting, it's just it's difficult to manage that all together.
I love that you use the word harmony and harmonization in all of this, because we should be able to embrace that. And, you also talked about, making compromises. I mean, who knows how many frameworks, standards, initiatives there are out there in the world. And we've really got to accept that we do need to harmonize, and we do need to simplify this. And I also really value that you said we need to ensure that there's no barrier to entry. I mean, if big companies like Diageo are challenged, if you will, by the noise out there, imagine small to mid-sized firms that should be part of all of this, but don't have the capacity and knowledge to say, yeah, sign me up for a water stewardship strategy and program. But what do I do? I can't afford it. It's confusing. And that's coming from a consultant. So, it's, but it's a problem. I mean, it's not easy for, an outsider to advise when there's a lot of noise in the marketplace and things that conflict.
Yeah, no, it is challenging. And I think, you said it, simplification, and life's not simple, but any simplification that these organizations can drive by working together, I think is very welcome.
Take the friction out of all this and we make a lot more progress.
I think it's interesting that you mentioned around greenwashing, Michael, particularly with the European regulation coming in. There has been a lot of greenwashing from companies over the years. So to actually, from the regulation driving the change, where you'll actually have to back up your claims with scientific-based evidence is going to be really interesting and probably much needed, because there's been a lot of greenwashing over the years. And I think also probably from a consumer point of view, people are just becoming quite skeptical when people say something is green or sustainable. It's right, actually now prove it and I'll back it up, right?
And I think what we haven't talked about is where you get brands and engaging with consumers. And I think we're quite conservative. We're very careful about how we do that, because our brands have been around for 100, 200, 300 years in some cases. So you don't sort of flick from one trend to another and think, I'll just do it this year and I'll do something next year. So and they're based on fundamental kind of brand benefits and communications cues. But we are trying to do that, because that's where you can influence consumers. That's where you can drive more investment through A&P. You can get more engagement as well, because people don't know who Diageo is, but they might know who Guinness is, or they might know what Don Julio tequila is, or they might know what whatever. So it gets more awareness and perhaps more engagement. But the nervousness around sort of, well, what can I say and what I can't say, and is a bit of a kind of an important hurdle to get across. But I think that's where the independent certifications come in place. When you've got that, or when you've got some very good tram lines, if you like, from international reporting protocols and all the rest of it. So we know the rules, and at the moment the rules, for example, when you mention nature, they're being developed as we go along, and there's various kind of initiatives doing that. And that's difficult for companies, because they can't quite know where they're going to go. Do they go now, or do they go later, or do they go with them, or whatever the kind of options are. But in other areas, there's well-established rules. We understand what we can report, how you measure it, and you can, everybody needs to do it. And if everybody does it this way, and it has it signed off by their, assurance companies or whatever, then, we know that hopefully it's very credible and bona fide.
Is there a specific brand example you can provide in terms of a brand that is communicating to consumers about sustainability issues? I mean, you've got an amazing portfolio of brands. Is there, maybe one or two that something like that aligns with? I think where I'm going with this?
Yeah, I was about to reel off a whole lot of examples of other brands not doing a good job of it.
Hey, Michael, this is your moment. You do what you want. So
I'm not here to sell more alcohol. So, but I think there are pockets of it locally. Yes, there are pockets of it locally for us, and we've done some good work with some smaller brands. But I think ultimately, we're quite careful. We're looking, for example, in our tequila business with our brand Don Julio. We've been doing an awful lot of work in Mexico and Jalisco. So how can we work with the brand there, which is mostly consumed in North America and a bit beyond? So that's one brand that comes to mind. But I wouldn't say that I would hold out a brilliant example of longevity around it. I think there's back to this 300 years old thing. I think we're quite small baby steps into this, because I think we need to understand how consumers of our products are going to react to it, and we need to understand what the drivers are, and we need to get the critical bit also is you might be able to talk about water, but meanwhile your carbon numbers don't look great. So how do you talk to a consumer about water when your carbon numbers aren't great, or vice versa? So you need to get that kind of consistency of performance across the board of almost everything. You might choose what we call to talk about what's above the waterline, the iceberg, but below the waterline has to be all in order as well. And
Sure.
and who's to judge you in order? Oh, this is good performance. Oh, that's a bit low. That's good. Oh, hang on. How do we claim to be a really water efficient or really progressive water brand when actually we're doing this around worms in the soil? And it's just different ways in which we can measure our performance.
Well, the data is now available, right? And consumers are savvy, so they can very quickly access the data on all your different parts of your environmental impact to kind of ask questions.
Yeah, no, it's definitely challenging.
Amazing. Well, Michael, thanks so much for joining us. That's absolutely whizzed by. We've covered lots of different developments. Hopefully, there's still some of your builder's tea left. We haven't got through all of it.
I'm still befuddled on that one.
Yeah, well, by the end of this season, we will have educated you on British builder's tea. So
I'll pivot from coffee to tea. It in fact could happen.
And something occasionally something a little bit stronger, Will, if you've got a special occasion.
Yes. So, Tom asked you your favorite brand or brands. So Tom, what's your favorite Diageo brand?
It has to be Diageo, right?
Well,
I would say,
Tom, I can't believe you said
no,
that.
I'm of course we're saying Diageo. I'd probably say Captain Morgan's from the spice rum that you guys have done for the years. It's been one of my drinks. What about you, Will?
I have enjoyed Kettle One for a very, very long time.
Good.
But Don Julio, the other person that I live with in this house is a huge Don Julio fan. And there's more than one bottle sitting on our bar. So, I'd say there are a number of things that I like.
Good. Well, as long as it's enjoyed responsibly, then long may it
is. We always have a designated driver. So yes,
we will make sure in the write-up to this episode of the stream, those words about consuming alcohol responsibly will be in every single part of it. Michael, don't worry.
Thank you.
Actually, that's an important point, Tom. So let's add it.
We'll have it done. Amazing. Well, Michael, thanks so much for joining us and kickstarting this water ag season with a bang. Amazing to sort of hear your experience viewpoint, and good luck for the continued work in the 12 basins and making that collective action happen despite as you mentioned, some of the challenges as well. It's been a pleasure. Great to speak with you.
Yeah, I'm very optimistic. Thank you very much for having me, Will and Tom. Thank you.
Great to have you on board, and great that you're an optimist. No, seriously. I mean, when we started the stream, we talked about it. We wanted to lead with optimism.
Good.
So,
excellent.
All right. Well, Michael, take care of yourself.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, guys. Thank you.
Bye. Bye, Tom.
Bye.